My name is John Anthony Miller, and today I am 98 years old. 98. When I say that number out loud, it still surprises me. I find myself looking at my hands, at all the marks that time has left, and I think about everything these hands have touched, carried, pushed away, and sometimes let go of when they shouldn't have. But that's exactly why I'm here, telling this story. Not because I'm some special man. I'm a long way from that. I'm here because I learned things that took me far too long to understand, and I don't want you to take as long as I did. I was born in 1928 in the Mid-City neighborhood, right there in New Orleans, Louisiana, a hot, noisy city full of life and contradictions, just like me. My mother's name was Martha, and my father was Frank. Simple people who didn't have much, but who taught me the value of hard work by the way they lived, without ever needing to say a word about it. When I was 19, I started working at a small corner store in the Lower Garden District. A Mr. Rayburn ran the place, a heavy-set man, strict but fair, who taught me more about people than any book ever could have. At that grocery store, I watched the world parade in front of me. I saw the lady who bought rice on a tab because her husband was out of work. I saw the young guy who always came in on Friday with a hopeful shine in his eye, as if the weekend was going to save something that was already getting lost during the week. I saw kids who came to buy candy with sweaty coins in their hands, and I understood, even without knowing how to explain it, that all those scenes told a story much bigger than any counterside chat. It was at that same counter that I met Mary. She walked in on a March afternoon in 1952, wearing a floral dress and with a way of walking that made it seem like the floor was lucky to receive her steps. She came to buy flour and beans, but she left with my heart in her pocket, and I think she knew exactly what she'd done. Mary was from a family in the Deep South, raised with that mix of strictness and affection you only find out in the Louisiana countryside. We got married 2 years later, in '54, in a small but joyful ceremony, and we started building our life together right there in New Orleans. During the first years of our marriage, I thought it was enough to work, support the house, and meet my obligations. I thought that was what love was, that physical presence was the same as real presence, that bringing bread to the table was a way of saying, "I love you," even without speaking the words. But I was very wrong, and that illusion cost me dearly, bit by bit, without me even realizing it. That's the problem with certain beliefs. They look so much like the truth that you never stop to question them. Mary would try to talk, and I would answer with silence, not because I was a cruel man, but because I had grown up in a house where feelings were kept under lock and key, where showing weakness was something a man just didn't do. So I held it all in, every frustration, every fear, every dissatisfaction. I kept piling it all up inside me like someone stacking boxes in a storage unit, thinking the structure would hold forever, but no structure holds forever. I started getting headaches that wouldn't go away, stomach problems that medicine couldn't fix. The doctor talked about nerves, about stress, about needing to rest. I'd listen, leave his office, and go right back to the same cycle: work, silence, worry, more silence. It was only when I was 55 that something changed. On an ordinary night, Mary made a small comment about something I had done differently than she expected, and I, for the first time in my life, opened my mouth and said what I thought, without yelling, without insulting, but with clarity. I said what I felt. I expected the worst. I expected conflict, a fight, tears, but what happened was a silence different from all the others, a silence that breathed. And then Mary looked at me and simply said that she had been waiting for that conversation for a long time, that she had things bottled up too, and that it was time we learned to really talk. That night, something inside of me left. And it wasn't anything good that departed, no. It was the knots, the blockages, the weight I didn't even know I was carrying until it was gone. But not everything in this life gets solved with a good conversation. And I learned that in the hardest way possible, when my son Anthony started to worry me in a way I couldn't quite name. Anthony was my pride and joy. He grew up to be a good student, a hard worker, married well, built his life with his own 2 hands. But there was something he inherited from me that I never wanted him to carry, that habit of ignoring what his body was telling him. Anthony was always complaining about being tired, about a general feeling of being unwell that never went away, but he always had an excuse. Work, commitments, responsibilities, anything was a good enough reason not to stop and listen to what his own body was screaming. I tried to talk to him. I tried several times. But a grown son can be stubborn, especially when he inherited his father's bullheadedness. And there I was, seeing what was happening, without being able to do enough to change the course of things. What happened next with Anthony, I'll save for a little later, because that part of the story needs to be told with the care it deserves. What I can say now is that the situation broke me on the inside in a way that completely changed how I saw life. It taught me that the body speaks and that we need to learn to listen before it has to scream. But while all this was happening with my son, there was another shadow growing inside my own home, a shadow I had unintentionally fed for years. There was a person in my life, someone I considered a true friend, someone who was present for many of the most important moments I lived through, and who I discovered, much later than I should have, was harming me in a way I couldn't even identify at first. This friend, whom I'll call Charles, was the type of person who always seemed to be suffering more than anyone else. Any topic became a complaint, any situation a reason to lament, and I, who had been raised to be loyal, would just sit there listening, trying to help, without realizing that all that energy was emptying me out from the inside. There were nights when I'd come home after meeting up with Charles and feel completely drained, without being able to explain why. Mary would ask me what had happened, and I'd say I was tired from work. But it wasn't the work. It was this vacuum that certain people create around themselves, one that sucks you in slowly, without making a sound. It took me way too long to understand that, and when I finally did, it came with a guilt that wasn't easy to carry, because we're taught that leaving someone is abandonment, that pulling away is weakness, that true friendship withstands anything. But nobody tells you that some relationships withstand things at your expense, that they stay alive by feeding on you, that they survive because you give up a piece of yourself to sustain them. That was one of the hardest lessons of my life. And it wasn't done teaching me everything I needed to know, because what was about to happen next, I could have never imagined. The man who learned to live. What I never expected to discover in that year of 1987 was that Charles, the friend I had kept for decades, the man I had defended when others criticized him, was holding a secret that would change everything between us. And it wasn't just any secret. It was a secret that concerned my own family. It was my youngest daughter, Claire, who told me. She had come home with an expression I'd never seen on her face, a mix of hesitation and determination, like someone carrying a heavy stone who knows they have to set it down somewhere but is afraid of the noise it will make. We sat on the porch, the New Orleans heat weighing down the afternoon, and she told me she had spoken with Charles at a family party. He had had more to drink than he should have, and between one thing and another, he revealed that for years he had been telling our family's secrets to other people. Small details, situations that only someone on the inside could know, stories I had shared with him in moments of vulnerability, trusting in a true friendship. If this story has caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. My first impulse was not to believe it. That's always the first impulse when reality collides with what you've built up in your head for years. But Claire had details that left no room for doubt. And then came that feeling that doesn't have a proper name. It's not anger. It's not sadness. It's something in between, a kind of scorched earth inside you. I went 3 days without sleeping right, not just because of the hurt, but because I was forced to re-examine everything, every conversation, every moment of weakness I had shared, every time I had chosen to trust. And I asked myself with a painful honesty what I had ignored all those years. What signs had I chosen not to see because seeing them meant acting, and acting meant losing something I thought I needed? It was in that moment that I truly understood the difference between loyalty and being an accomplice to your own suffering. I confronted Charles. It was a difficult conversation, no shouting, but heavy with weight. He didn't deny everything, but he didn't own up to it with the integrity the situation demanded either. And there, looking at him, I realized that our friendship hadn't ended that day. It had ended a long time ago. What ended that day was just my insistence on pretending it still existed. I walked away. And a funny thing happened. I felt a relief I hadn't expected, as if a constant noise I had learned to ignore had suddenly stopped. As if the silence that came after that separation was, for the first time in a long time, a restful silence. But life didn't give me a break for long. Right after that, what I had feared for Anthony came to pass. My son was diagnosed with a severe kidney disease, advanced, serious, the kind the doctor tells you about with that slow, heavy voice you never want to hear. He had ignored his body for so long that by the time the situation became impossible to hide, it had already become far too complicated. I was by his side for every appointment, every procedure. I held his hand when he was scared, and I learned a lesson right alongside him that neither of us had understood before. The body is not our adversary. It tries to warn us. The problem is, we're taught to just push through, to tough it out, to not complain. And that culture of limitless effort might look good on paper, but inside a hospital, it doesn't save anyone. Anthony went through a long and difficult treatment. There were moments when I had my doubts, when fear would grip me so tightly I'd have to leave the room so he wouldn't see me like that. But he was strong, in the way you don't know you're strong until you have to be. And with time, with care, with listening, and with the right doctors, he started finding his way back to himself. That transformed me in a way that words can barely describe. Mary had already passed a few years before all this happened. She went peacefully, in her sleep, just like she always said she wanted to. And I found myself, for the first time in decades, completely alone. Not in a bad way, at least not at first, but with that kind of loneliness that tests you, that asks who you are when there's no one else around to define you. I started buying things I didn't need. New clothes, kitchen appliances that stayed in the box, knickknacks that filled the house but didn't fill anything else. Until one day Claire looked at me and said, "Dad, you're buying what's missing on the inside out there." She was right. And I knew she was right because it hurt in the way the truth always does. I stopped the shopping. I started teaching. In the neighborhood where I lived, there were kids reaching their teens who couldn't read properly. I started volunteering my time at a community center in Central City. I'd go 3 times a week, sit with those kids, and go slowly, from the very beginning, letter by letter. And something happened that I never expected. I was healed by them. By the attention they gave me, by the light in their eyes when something clicked, by the noisy joy of someone who learns and realizes that learning is a form of freedom. That gave me a purpose that no shopping spree ever could have. And then came the last great lesson, the one that arrived the latest but sank in the deepest. When I was 70, a dear friend of mine, a man who always said he was going to travel across the country, that he was going to learn to play the guitar, that one day he'd go on that spiritual retreat he so longed for, was struck by a sudden illness that forced him to be still for a very long time. The trips never happened. The guitar was never bought. The retreat remained a plan. I visited him several times during that period, and on one of those visits he looked at me and said, "John, don't put off for tomorrow what can be now, not because life is short, but because later is an illusion we use to protect ourselves from the present." That very same month, I booked a trip to the Grand Canyon. I went alone, at 70 years old, with a small suitcase and an open heart, and it was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had. Since then, I've never again let the fear of later rob me of now. Today, at 98 years old, I look back on my life and I don't see perfection. I see a long road, full of curves I didn't see coming, of stumbles that taught me more than any success. I see a man who took a long time to learn how to speak, to learn how to listen to his own body, to understand which relationships nourished him and which ones drained him. A man who wasted time buying things he didn't need and gained the best of his time teaching children to read. If I could go back and tell myself one thing, it would be this: live now. Take care of yourself now. Say what you need to say now. Walk away from what drains you now. Don't wait for certainty. Don't wait for the right moment. Don't wait for life to give you permission, because life doesn't ask for permission to go by.